Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the second in our 2016 webinar series with David Ackert, From Handshakes to LinkedIn, Personal Branding That Attracts New Business. This series is brought to you by the International Lawyers Network, of which your firm is a valued member. The ILN is an association of 91 high-quality, full-service law firms with over 5,000 lawyers in 67 countries on 6 continents. Couple of housekeeping notes for you. To ask questions, please use the chat box on your screen, and I'll ask these of David as we're going along. We'll be sharing a PDF of the presentation slides along with the recording following the session. Our next webinar with David takes place on July 28th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time and is on time management for busy lawyers, increasing efficiency in a demanding work environment. Our presenter today and throughout the series is David Ackert. David is the president of the Ackert Advisory and mentor to high-achieving professionals in the legal profession. He has developed and implemented business development programs for countless firms, from AmLaw 100s to local boutiques. Widely recognized as an e-learning pioneer in the legal field, David is the founder of Practice Boomers, a business development e-learning program and 2-time winner of the Legal Marketing Association's Your Honor Awards. He is also the founder of Practice Pipeline, a pipeline management software platform that incorporates business development coaching. The combination of technology and coaching has become a hallmark of his program. So with that, I'll hand over the microphone to David for his presentation.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Great to be back with you all, those of you who are in this ILN network. So today we're going to talk a little bit about personal branding as it relates to both handshake marketing, that is to say, face-to-face interactions with prospective referral sources or existing referral sources or even clients and prospects. And also LinkedIn, the branding, the digital brand, if you will, that we seek to create through online means using primarily LinkedIn as the social media platform that's, as we'll look at in a moment, the platform that most lawyers are using effectively. So let's dive into that. One of the things that I want to make sure that we're doing at the beginning of these programs is going through the full agenda so that you have a sense of expectations more specifically on what we'll be covering. So we'll be looking at creating a unique message that differentiates your practice from the competition. This section, really, there's an invitation to be somewhat interactive here. So for those of you who are able to type in some responses to the questions that I'll be asking, I really encourage you to do it. You'll get more out of this program if you're able to do that and really apply what I'll be talking about and tailoring it to your practice. So be at the ready to do that when we get to that part of the program. We'll be creating an elevator speech, or some people call it an elevator pitch, that answers the question, what do you do? It's the question that you are most often asked in a networking context, and it's certainly the question that people who are looking up your LinkedIn profile are asking themselves. So how do we answer that question such that it's compelling and memorable and hopefully stands apart from everybody else who does rather similar things to what many of you do? We'll spend a little bit of time optimizing the LinkedIn profile so that it represents you well. And then finally, we'll talk a little more about digital branding strategies that are efficient, but also helping you to harness social media effectively. So let's talk a little bit about your brand. You know, a lot of people don't really think of themselves as having a brand, or perhaps they understand it as a concept, but they haven't really gone through the process of translating who they are and what stands out about them in the context of a brand. Most people, if really pressed on this, would boil their brand down to affiliations and accomplishments. So maybe, I'm a partner at such and such a firm, and that's my brand. So that's my, the affiliation there. Maybe it's my practice area. Oh, I'm an employment lawyer, and so that's my brand. Or perhaps it's my alma mater. I graduated from a top law school, and so, especially earlier in my career, I'm going to hold that out as part of what sets me apart from other lawyers. Some lawyers start bringing in things like charity boards or various associations and groups that they may belong to help differentiate themselves. Others may rely more on accomplishments. I sit on a particular panel or a particular committee at the firm. I've published this or that article. I've appeared on this or that list. I've had certain wins in the courtroom, or perhaps I have a certain level of expertise in a particular subset of a legal practice or in a particular industry. But consider that the marketplace has become really too oversaturated at this point to be relying on many of these affiliations or accomplishments as being the sole kind of branding technique that you're using. You may say, well, I'm a partner at such and such a firm, but chances are there's at least a dozen other firms in the same category and competing for the same work. So that doesn't really set you apart in any meaningful way for the client if the client has at least 12 other options from the law firm perspective, let alone the many lawyers that may work at those firms. Practice area, again, same challenge. Alma mater, really nobody cares after a few years what your alma mater was because it starts to become ancient history, especially as you become a partner. Charity boards, associations, all those things can help create commonality with you and the other person, but they are somewhat limited in terms of being sole differentiators and really leading components of your brand. Same as with the various accomplishments on the right side of your screen here. So let's take a deeper dive into how you can start to set yourself apart and really bring a little bit more of what makes you unique as a person, not just as a lawyer. It all begins with how you describe yourself. So some people call this the elevator speech, others call it the elevator pitch. Concept is the same. The etymology of this really is from Hollywood, where the idea is that you would step into an elevator and if you're lucky, you're standing next to, I don't know, Christopher Nolan or Steven Spielberg or pick your favorite filmmaker. And, you just by dumb luck happen to be in a very small room with the audience of somebody very powerful. And you have about 4 or maybe 14, depending on the size of the building, floors during which you can turn to them and say, hey, I've got an idea. And then you pitch it. And it's got to be memorable and it's got to be succinct and it's got to be compelling. And hopefully, if you're lucky, before they get off the elevator, they'll hand you their business card and say, call my people. I think we have a movie here or whatever it is that you may be pitching. So that's the idea of this being this taking place in an elevator. And of course, we've borrowed this in the legal profession because the notion that it needs to be memorable and succinct and hopefully set you apart from any other elevator speech or pitch that they might hear. But most importantly, and I think a lot of lawyers forget about this, a lot of people forget about this when they're making their elevator pitch, is that it really needs to encourage a dialogue. Ideally, sure, they hand you their business card and say, call my people. But even better than that, they say, well, get off on this floor with me and let's walk for a bit because I want to get to know you better. I really like what you're saying and I like the way you're saying it. And I want to continue this conversation. Let's start building a relationship. That's where your elevator pitch has really hit a home run. So let's look at how we might break apart the various elements of your personal brand into an elevator pitch for not only your firm, but really you individually so that it puts your best foot forward. So there's 4 categories here. As you can see, we're going to be looking at traits, your personal interests. They are often, and I would encourage even always, an important component of your elevator pitch. Any methods that you bring to the way you practice, and then finally expertise. Now, most lawyers really just focus on expertise. This is my market area, or this is my market niche, my practice area, and these are some of the client issues I tend to handle. So if you think about the way that you have probably historically introduced yourself to other people when they said, so what do? You've either said, I'm a litigator, and given them the most truncated version of an answer to that sentence, which doesn't really invite a dialogue, does it? I mean, all they can do is just say, oh, okay, thanks for telling me. And now you have to start the conversation all over again, and they have to ask you another question. So rather than placing the burden of driving the conversation on them, you want to leave the what answer to what do you do as sort of an open-ended dialogue that will then be explored and hopefully segued into more of an exchange. And usually just focusing on expertise won't get you there. So we have traits, young lawyers who are younger or come from a particular culture or perhaps are able to leverage their gender I'm a female lawyer. Obviously, you don't have to say that, but you can say I focus on a lot of work with female GCs, or I sit on a particular committee for women leaders in the legal space, or we see these sort of women's initiatives really take hold because you're leveraging that trait as a way to set you apart from other lawyers that just aren't going to be able to work their way into that club. Same could be true of your age. Many lawyers feel like, gosh, I'm just a mid-level or a senior associate. I haven't really established a lot of expertise, or haven't really become a go-to lawyer in any particular space. I'm still exploring. Well, I would encourage that your age actually sets you apart in particular marketplaces as a boon, particularly if you're focusing on technology or some of the other industries that tend to skew younger. You can position your age as a relevancy rather than a detriment. Culture, same thing. I'm Korean by descent, and I work with a lot of Korean businesses because we really understand each other's cultural issues and the kinds of business challenges that tend to occur in that sort of a cross-border dynamic. Whatever it is, you can look to see if traits are going to be something that you can leverage to your benefit. I'm going to come back to interests in a moment, but let's move over to methodology. Many firms are starting to take on this notion of innovation, branded initiatives that help set them apart from other firms. Even something as simple as, we use project management or a particular kind of software at our firm to ensure that we're providing the most efficient and cost-effective solutions. Another methodology might have something to do with the way that you price your services, perhaps some of the AFAs that you tend to lead with. Again, this is all sort of has less to do with the actual practice of law and more about how you have packaged it with various methodologies. That can also be an important differentiator. Just be careful that you're not always leaning on, we're big law firm lawyers, but, we're charging medium-sized law firm prices. I assure you all of your competitors, if you're a medium-sized firm, are saying the exact same thing. And so it's not much of a differentiator at all. And in today's price-sensitive environment, really, that's table stakes anyway. Obviously, no one's looking for the most expensive law firm that gives them the least amount of value. So just be mindful. Put yourself in the client's shoes as you're thinking about how your elevator pitch would set you apart in a compelling way. Personal interest, we're going to handle this a little bit more in a moment, but your elevator pitch should usually end with something like your hobbies, your personal interests, your charity involvement. In a moment, I'll walk you through a model where we can tie all of these things together. But that's the thing that people are going to want to talk about. So if you say, I'm a real estate litigator, and I tend to work with developers and investors and commercial property owners. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on here at our firm is that we have a project management system in place that ensures that the litigation is going to be delivered at the highest value and highest efficiency for our clients. And when I'm not doing that, I have two young boys at home, so we find our weekends are usually spent either in Disney World or at a park or doing some sort of Nerf gun war, and they certainly keep me vibrant and exhausted at the same time. Now, what do you think they're going to say by way of response? They're not going to say, "Really, tell me more about that real estate litigation. That sounds fascinating." Now, maybe if they're another real estate lawyer, they might want to geek out with you about that. But more than likely, they're going to say, "Oh, really? How old are your boys? And gosh, I've got one too. And, my nephew really is into Nerf gun wars," or, whatever. You're going to find yourselves building on that part of your elevator pitch. And then maybe you'll circle back to some of the other things that you said. But consider everything that preceded that was just seed planting. You're looking to give them some context into what you do and answer that question, what do you do? But you're answering it a little more globally. It's not just what do you do between the hours of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, or whatever kinds of hours you're clocking at your firm. It's also just what do you do in life? And you have an opportunity to segue into that so that you have a more productive relationship building dialogue. Now, this is not only true of handshake marketing, it's also true on LinkedIn, and we'll get to that in a moment. If you're looking for a quick acronym here, this spells out TIME, time. It's just an easy way to kind of remember the 4 elements of personal branding. So this starts translating into your elevator pitch. It typically uses the 4 elements below. I just gave you an example of it. So who you are, your name, your firm, your practice area, your key client profile, so the kinds of clients you tend to work with. Now, this is important because if you say, well, I tend to work with developers and investors and, so on, and they happen to know a developer or an investor, or that happens to be a category of people that they have in their network, well, then they might say, well, goodness, do you know Joe Smith? He's in this building too. Perhaps I should facilitate an introduction. Or, oh, that's interesting. There's actually some synergy between our practices or between our businesses. Let's talk further, right? So it's always important to put your key client profile in that. Don't just stop with number 1 here, your name, your firm, your practice area. And then what sets you apart? It's usually a good idea to do that. Again, this is where you'll start to borrow from the TIME, especially those methods or traits, or if there's a particular area of expertise that you can touch on a little bit here. And then finally, you end with personal interest. So when I'm not practicing law, I do X, I do Y, I do Z. I collect wine, I have an extensive wine collection, or, I am a voracious reader and I'm part of 3 different book clubs, or, whatever it is. I just really enjoy golf. So you definitely want to end with that for the reasons that I just explained, but consider that this is a more thorough model for an elevator pitch than just answering with, perhaps your name and the name of your firm and maybe what you do there. So this is one of those moments where I'm going to invite you to use the keyboard and take this model and offer an elevator pitch. Now, not only here we are at ILN, which is a network, hence the N, you have an opportunity to pitch yourself, if you will, to everyone else who's dialed in. We have a healthy audience today. And they'll get to hear who you are and what you do and what sets you apart. That will obviously more likely bring a referral your way than if you're just part of the crowd. But it also will give us an opportunity to tweak that a little bit. And I'm happy to work with you in real time here during this program as a demonstration of how to craft one of these elevator pitches. So hopefully you're starting to type a couple of words in here in terms of who you are, your key client profile, what sets you apart, and maybe a word or 2 about your personal interests. So while we're waiting for a couple of those to come through, Lindsay, feel free to interrupt me as people start to type those in. I'm going to continue our momentum here. So consider also that this translates into your online or your digital brand because we can distill these 4 elements of our brand, who we are, our key client profile, what sets us apart, and our personal interests, into keywords. Now, we all know what keywords are. We use them whenever we go into a search engine and search for something. We try to distill the concept of what we're looking for down to a couple of catchphrases or even a couple of words that we're pretty sure are going to direct the search engine to the results that we are looking for. So think as well as you're going through this process of creating an elevator pitch for yourself about some of the keywords that would make up your brand. This is really just taking those 4 elements that we just walked through a moment ago and distilling them down to a couple of keywords. So it might be for my earlier example, real estate, litigation, developers, investors, proud father of 2 boisterous boys. Those would be the keywords that I might fill in to these 5 blanks here, these 5 fields, to give you at a very high level a sense of who I am and what I do. I might also put my firm in there if I felt that was going to help with my branding. For those of you who are perhaps struggling a bit with the concept of, gosh, how do I take what I do and distill it into language that really sets me apart because so many people do what I do, you may want to consider that your clients and referral sources have a better or more accurate impression of your brand and what sets you apart than you do. So sometimes when we're working with lawyers and coaching them through this process, we just ask them to go to some of their top clients and say, we're going through a little bit of a branding exercise at the firm. Why did you engage us? What sets us apart from other law firms out there that you could have chosen for the various matters that you've sent our way? And your clients will have an answer. This is a great way to have a productive client interview with, a client, and they'll say something like, "Oh, you guys are incredibly responsive, or you guys are really knowledgeable about, this or that particular area of law, or we just love the fact that you're local and that we can, have a meeting with you because you're basically right down the street. I know we don't take advantage of that as much as we should, but it's really helpful to us that, you're right around the corner, or it's the relationship that we've developed with you. You guys are really easy to work with and really relatable. You're relatable lawyers, and that's not something that's easy to find." So again, whatever it is that they say can start to inform this branding exercise for you. Okay, so we'll move into your digital brand. Again, Lindsay, feel free to interrupt me if anyone is typing in an elevator speech or any keywords that we want to work with in real time. So consider that there are many social media platforms out there, but the one that is most likely to yield a sale or a transaction, at least in the United States, is LinkedIn, according to social media studies. And this is especially true among lawyers. Now, blogging certainly rates behind LinkedIn. There's a chance that someone might read your blog and decide, oh, this person really knows what they're talking about. They clearly have some expertise in this arena. We should pick up the phone and call them. But blogging typically ends up being a one-way experience. People will read the blog and maybe they'll sort of file the information away, but they won't necessarily pick up the phone and engage the author of that blog for a matter just because they happen to read it. And I think a lot of the reason for this is that so many firms now are blogging and blogging about similar kinds of topics that there's just a lot of white noise out there. But LinkedIn does rise above the others in terms of its likelihood to yield a sale or transaction. In fact, according to a recent study by the ABA, over 78% of business decision makers use LinkedIn to search for a lawyer online. Now, I want to clarify this statistic a little bit because this is typically when a business decision maker is investigating a lawyer that they are going to engage for a new matter. So it's someone they haven't worked with before. So obviously your clients aren't going online and looking at your profile so much because they already have a sense of who you are. They might occasionally be driven there because of some content that you posted, and that's usually a good idea. But they already have your phone number. They know how to reach you. They're not necessarily looking to see what was the latest article that you published. But obviously, those who are considering engaging you or your firm for a new matter will definitely be going on LinkedIn. In fact, if you look at the Google Analytics on your website, you may find that much of the traffic that is driven to the lawyer bio pages on your website comes through LinkedIn. So people go to LinkedIn first because, yes, they can learn everything that is already on the bio page on your website. And in fact, most firms just copy and paste whatever's on their bio and stick it in their summary section on LinkedIn, which is not a practice I recommend, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But LinkedIn also tells them things like who they know who knows you, who might be able to vouch for you. If you're in a jurisdiction that allows endorsements or recommendations, they will definitely be checking those out because they want to know who's said things about working with you, what it's like to work with you. These are all things that they can get some insight into on LinkedIn, and it's very difficult to do that on a static web page like a law firm bio page. So remember that LinkedIn is an important part of your digital brand and needs to be something that you give some consideration to. So let's take a moment and just work through a couple of the details on making sure that your LinkedIn profile is doing what you want it to do. So this is an example of some things that Joan is doing well. In case you're worried, there is no Joan Smith, and as far as I know, there's no firm called Smith & More. I just made it up. But Joan is doing some things right and some things maybe not so right. So first of all, Joan is a partner at Smith & Mora. I'm going to assume that she's the Smith in Smith & Mora, which means that she's a senior partner, which tells me that this photo is at least 10 years old. So Joan, you looked great back in the aughts or maybe the 90s, whenever this was taken, but it's time to update that picture. And you want to make sure that your picture is up to date. It just communicates that maybe you're embarrassed about how you look, if your picture is clearly outdated, and it just sends the wrong message about your level of expertise and gravitas and so on. So get a good picture taken. I'm sure you still look great. You want to just make sure that it's something that's current. And sometimes this is just a function of lawyers being too busy or lazy or whatever it is. They really like that old picture, but I would encourage you to get past that and make sure that that story you're telling is a current story. Something else that Joan may want to think about doing here is that in her what we'll call her tagline or her title line here, which is right under her name, she has put her title as a partner at Smith & Mora. Now, that's not a really great use of real estate because LinkedIn just under that will tell you currently where you're working. Turns out it's Smith & Mora. So, this is a little bit redundant, and she's lost an opportunity to use that title line, which is actually a very important line for a number of reasons. One, it's one of the first things that people look at when they look you up. And secondly, it's also a sensitive field for the search engine that LinkedIn is. So LinkedIn is looking for the words in your title there to bring up search results to people who are doing searches, and it's highly unlikely that they're searching partners at Smith & Mora. They're probably more likely searching real estate litigator or whatever Joan Smith is. So something for Joan to consider. She may want to swap that out and put a few taglines, or as we called them earlier, keywords, in this title section. She may, if she really wants to make sure that everybody knows she's a partner, she can also, say partner at the firm or something like that here. But again, people are not necessarily looking up the word partner. They're looking up solutions to their problems. I have a complex litigation issue and I need a good lawyer for that. Or, I have this real estate problem and I need to find somebody who can help me with that. And it would be really helpful if they also have some business law background. So these are the things that are going to address the client's needs. They're not as interested in the fact that you're a partner at your law firm, and they're going to figure that out based on the way that LinkedIn puts this information into your header here anyway. Also, one thing that Joan's doing really well down here is in her background or her experience section, which, by the way, is the third area that people spend the most time on when they go to your LinkedIn profile. The first thing that they look at is your picture, and obviously your name, your title, et cetera. And then the third thing that they're looking at is this summary section. So make sure that in the summary section, you're using headlines rather than just copy and pasting a lot of paragraphs that describe what you do in great detail. That's really what your law firm bio page is for. I would argue that your LinkedIn page is a place where you can truncate some of that and make it a little bit more readable, given the fact that they're only going to be spending about 7 seconds on this page. So Joan has done that fairly well here. She's also made it in first person, which is a little more friendly, and it ties back into this concept of having an elevator pitch on your LinkedIn page. This is essentially what she would say, or at least the beginning of it, if she were following that 4-point model that we just talked about in terms of the elevator pitch in the earlier slide here. Okay, so a couple of best practices. Make sure your profile is 100% complete. Feature your keywords so that you're more searchable, especially if you have specializations that are searchable. Remember that visitors will only spend an average of 7 seconds on your profile. That's a statistic that comes from LinkedIn itself. And if you just want to count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, up to 7, that's just basically enough time for them to dart their eyes around, maybe catch a few sentences from your summary section, maybe scroll down to see whatever publications you might have written. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But, you want, at the very least, for them to get a quick understanding of the kinds of problems you can solve for them within that 7-second time frame. So you want to think about headlines, not laundry lists. This is, by the way, just to give credit where it's due, a concept that I learned from Adrian Dayton, who's a LinkedIn expert, does a lot of work with law firms. So thank you, Adrian, for teaching me a little bit about that. Now, to the extent that you can, you want to add articles and blogs to your profile. The reason for this is that it extends that 7 seconds into a longer period of time. Now, you may be thinking, why do I care if somebody spends 7 or 14 seconds or even a minute on my LinkedIn profile? Well, it's the same as what we talked about earlier with the analogy of the elevator pitch. You want this person to do more than just say, oh, you're a litigator and you do real estate. That's nice. Moving on. what you want them to do is say, tell me more. I want to learn more about you and your practice and how it might solve my problems and how there might be synergy here. And obviously, that's a longer conversation. So online, the longer they spend on your web page, essentially the longer the conversation, if you will, that is occurring in their minds about you is going on. So it's really important to start putting content on your profile if you haven't already. Publish it to your LinkedIn page, in your LinkedIn profile, so that they can click through and start to read some of the things that you have authored and some of the things that you have to say. Same is true with multimedia. You can put a slide share, which is basically a PowerPoint presentation, on your LinkedIn page. You can add videos of presentations that you've given. If you've given a CLE, it's a good idea to get that recorded so that you can post the recording or perhaps at least the highlights of that CLE recording to your LinkedIn page. User studies show that multimedia increases the amount of time spent on a web page by a factor of 400 or more %. So you jump that 7 up to a half a minute or perhaps even longer in terms of how much time people are likely to spend on your profile. And it makes sense. If you have video there, the urge is going to be for someone to click the video. And now you're talking to them and they're getting a sense of what you have to say. Multimedia enriched profiles are also underutilized, especially in the legal profession. Most lawyers still haven't posted videos or SlideShare or CLE or highlights from a CLE to their profile page. I would say take advantage of this before this becomes the norm among law firms. Also, one other note, it's not on here, but it really is a best practice. You want a disclaimer on your LinkedIn profile, especially if you're in a jurisdiction that allows recommendations or endorsements. Obviously, anyone can endorse you for anything, so they could just look at your picture and say, oh, they look like they're probably, pretty confident public speaker. I'm going to put public speaking down as one of their endorsed skills and endorse them for that. Well, you may never have done any public speaking at all, and so now all of a sudden your LinkedIn profile is misrepresenting you, and that's a no-no from the ABA's perspective. So first of all, you want to make sure that you're cleaning out those endorsements on a regular basis, or perhaps your marketing department is on top of this, but that's something to be mindful of. And also, it's a good idea to put some sort of disclaimer in the summary section of your profile page, something along the lines of, please note that, the results that have been indicated on this attorney advertising page are not representative of the results that you may experience by engaging this firm, or whatever the language is that obviously you want to come up with. And there are examples of this online. Reed Smith does a really good job of putting this on each attorney profile. So if you just want to look up Reed Smith lawyers, you'll see that they've all done this, and they've got some good language there that you might find useful. So let's look at the process that people go through when they start searching your keywords. So obviously, let's assume you've put the right keywords in your header and you've included them in your profile summary. Now someone's going to say real estate litigator. They may say also, complex litigation or business law or some of the other keywords that Joan used earlier. And sure enough, they're going to get the search results that they're looking for, assuming that Joan is part of their network. So they might do an advanced search that say, I just want to limit this to first or second tier connections. And so if Joan is not a first or second tier connection of that person's, she won't show up. It's not just going to list all of the real estate litigators in the world, but it will show up in terms of the people that the searcher is connected to. So this is an argument for connecting to as many people as you ethically can. Of course, the ABA discourages lawyers from just randomly reaching out and trying to connect with in-house counsel or business decision makers who they don't already have a relationship with. So you want to stay away from that practice. But if you do know people, by all means, make sure that you're connected to them on LinkedIn, because then when any of their contacts are doing a search for one of your keywords, your brand will make yourself available to them and obviously attract those opportunities to you. This also works on the inverse. Many lawyers are somewhat dormant in their use of LinkedIn, and so I would encourage regularly for lawyers to search their contacts using keywords that are consistent with the kinds of relationships that they're looking to form. So let's say you type in, I'm interested in general counsel at technology companies because, that's consistent with my area of expertise or the practice that I'm building. And I want to make sure that I filter this down to, first and second tier connections in my geographical location, certain size of company. And what LinkedIn will do is give you a list of people, obviously, and you may find that many of them are not people that you can reach out to for various reasons, but you often do find that needle in the haystack when you do this kind of search. So let's say that my first connection here is Bobby and second tier connection is James. Now, ethically, I can't just reach out to James and say, hey, James, we have Bobby in common. I'd really like to, do some work for your firm. That's called a cold call, and it's not particularly effective. It's also unethical in most jurisdictions. So rather than do that, what you want to do is pick up the phone, call Bobby, tell him, hey, Bobby, I was on LinkedIn. I happened to notice that you're connected to James, who's the GC of this tech company. We do a lot of work with those kinds of companies. Obviously, I don't want to just pick up the phone and call James or reach out to James without going through you. So I thought we could have a quick conversation. Number one, how well do you know James? Because a lot of us are connected on LinkedIn without having much of a relationship. But assuming that Bobby knows James fairly well, then you can start to brainstorm various means that will connect you to James in a way that is appropriate. So Bobby could propose a three-way lunch. Oh, yeah, I know James really well, and I'd be happy to, set up a lunch. In fact, I'm having lunch with him next week. Why don't I pick up the phone and see if James is open to having you join us? Or I'm actually attending James's company-sponsored event next month. Why don't you come along and you'll be my wingman, so to speak, and we'll attend that together. Or, I don't know James incredibly well, but I certainly know him well enough to forward a relevant article that you might have written. Why don't you send me one of the articles that you've written on some of the issues that tech companies are currently grappling with? And at the very least, you'll be on James's radar. And if James is interested in learning more, I'll certainly facilitate that introduction. Or perhaps, I am attending a poker game where James and I play from time to time. Why don't you come along to that? Or perhaps I can share a CLE topic that you think would be of interest to James. And if James bites, then I'll put you guys in touch. So you see, all of these are appropriate and ethical ways to reach through a first tier contact to a second tier contact. Now, I know we're a little off topic here, given that we're talking about branding, but since we are looking at the power of LinkedIn, I thought it would be useful to take a moment and point out some of these techniques that are going to enable you to make the best use of this network that you're branding yourself into. So I would encourage you and your lawyers at your firm to put as much content out into the online as possible. It bolsters your digital brand. Again, it's not necessarily going to lead to work because there is so much content that's being put out there. But if anyone's spending any time on your LinkedIn page, they're going to be interested to know what you have to say on a particular topic. And if you're not the type to author things, you just don't have the time or you don't have the inclination, you can just endorse other people's content. Just, grab an article that someone else has written, put a few words on there by way of your opinion on this or why you think this is relevant to, whatever happens to be going on right now, and post that. That's fine too. It sort of positions you as someone who knows what they're talking about when you're commenting on someone else who knows what they're talking about. But obviously, the ideal is to get original blogs and articles out into the internet and posted to your profile. According to the latest survey by Green Target of in-house counsel, 37% of inside counsel access content posted to LinkedIn by outside counsel. So the clients are looking at this stuff, and it helps to inform their opinion of your ability to solve their problems, and just sort of tells the story about your expertise and the brand that you're looking to communicate to the world. Collaborated content is a really interesting concept, and I know I've touched on this on prior webinars, so those of you who have attended all of the webinars that we've done through ILN so far may find some of these concepts to be familiar. But the idea is that especially if you're an associate and you're looking to establish some more credibility in your marketplace, become a little bit more of a go-to presence, It's a really good idea, but this, by the way, this strategy also works if you're a partner and you want to use it strategically in the way that I'm about to describe. But approach someone who can collaborate with you on the content. So for the associate, it might be a partner who has a good reputation in the space. For the partner, it might be a client or a referral source, and ask them to co-author a blog or an article. If they don't have the time or the inclination to co-author with you, you can propose that they merely offer a few comments in an interview. So you can say, you know what, I completely appreciate, you don't have the bandwidth to co-author something with me. Tell you what, let's just do a 10-minute interview. I'm going to ask you some questions on a topic that I'll author, and then, I'll obviously give you credit for the quotes that I use. Or maybe we turn this into a bit of a Q&A, and that way it minimizes the amount of time that you need to spend on this. So you'll find that if you have the right relationship and the person that you're asking recognizes the value of PR, that they'll probably say yes, especially given that you have a fallback position here of the interview if the co-author idea doesn't resonate for them. If you can, schedule your interview in person so that you can get to know them a little bit better. You can have some FaceTime with them. This would be an in-person session to either brainstorm the co-authorship or the interview if that's what they opt for. And if appropriate, by the end of your meeting with them, you could say something like, gosh, this is really helpful, and your comments were right on point, and this is exactly what I intend to use for the piece, or, I think this is going to be a really strong co-authored piece. I'd like to add a third perspective, especially if this is an interview. It makes sense. I'd like a third interviewee here. So this is great. I now have the in-house counsel perspective on this issue that I was going to write about, but I'd be interested in at least one or two others. Can you connect me to one or two colleagues that you might have in your in-house counsel network so that I can interview them as well? So you're using the article as a way of establishing a connection and a dialogue with other people on the client side. Once you've published the piece, make sure you share it with them, invite them to distribute it to their network. This is a great way to cross-pollinate and broaden your brand to people who might not otherwise have been exposed to you. So it also just communicates to the world the kind of company you keep because of this association, this collaboration. And then thank your co-author or interviewees in whatever way is appropriate and ethical. It might be, pick up the phone and call them. It might be a bottle of wine, whatever it is that you've deemed to be appropriate. But you want this to live in their minds as a very positive experience, because chances are you're going to be picking up the phone and asking them to do it again within the next 12 months, or at least asking them for another idea on an interviewee since they've already benefited once from this process. So as I said, this can affiliate you with a credible co-author or interviewee. It broadens and deepens your network, not only deepens with the person that you collaborated with, but it broadens it, assuming that they publicize it to their network. It enrolls a brand promoter. They're promoting your brand, and it generates content that can be converted perhaps into a joint presentation. Perhaps we can do this as a joint CLE, or perhaps I can bring the CLE topic into your company and do it for your legal department now that you've provided some commentary on it and I have a better understanding of your perspective on this particular issue. So you see, there's a lot of different ways that you can leverage this to positive effect. Another important exercise that you may want to consider in terms of your brand is Google yourself. We don't really do this very often. There's a way to do this so that you get an insight into what other people are seeing when they Google you. You have to log out of your Google account. Most of us are logged into Gmail or Google when we're using Google so that the search results that we get are tailored to us. You want to log out of Google so that you don't get that. So again, your search results are less biased that way. Type your keywords in. Obviously, your name should be one of your keywords, but Joan, I forgot what Joan Smith. Yeah, Joan Smith. Joan Smith, real estate, litigation, business law. Type it into Google. See what comes up. Does she come up? Joan Smith is a pretty common name. There could be several other Joan Smiths out there who are trumping her on Google. And so what she'll want to do at that point is start putting some more content out there to start improving her Google rankings. And make sure that her brand is represented somewhere in the top 5 links, especially if her name is in it, because we are in an era and have been for decades now where people can do this kind of due diligence, and they are doing it. And this is how they're finding you. You don't want them to find the wrong Joan Smith, or if they don't even know who you are, to be looking up attorneys in practice areas that are similar to yours but not having you in the running somewhere in there. So make sure that your brand is effective, and that's one litmus test, certainly not the only one, but one of them that you can use to identify that. You can also try this exercise in LinkedIn and have someone else who is logged into their LinkedIn account search for you in LinkedIn and see who else comes up besides you and why they're coming up. Look at their profile. Is it because they have a lot of content? Is it because they've done a better job of putting their keywords in their profile? Are they using that headline in a way that's a little more strategic than you are? All of these insights are useful, and it's all part of competitive intelligence, which is something that anyone who's taking branding seriously should be exploring. Okay, so that brings us to the end of my prepared remarks today. So hopefully you have a sense of how to create that unique message that differentiates your practice from the competition. I know I encourage you to use the Q&A chat box to put in your elevator pitch. I don't know if we had any takers, but regardless, you can certainly use that exercise on your own time when you have a little bit of time to reflect on it. And I know Lindsay will be distributing the slide deck so that you have those materials and can walk through it. It'll help you create an elevator speech that answers the question, what do you do with compelling language, and optimize your LinkedIn profile with some of those best practices I shared so that it represents you and helps you to surface your brand from the white noise out there. And then finally, through that co-authorship strategy, you can help harness the power of social media a little more effectively and efficiently than you may already be doing. So with that, we have a few minutes for Q&A. Lindsay, I turn this back over to you in case there are any questions that have come in.
Thanks so much, David. You've given everyone a lot to think about, I think, and so we don't have any questions coming in just yet. So I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes to use the chat box to ask any questions that they may have. And I echo David's comment to invite all of you to use that worksheet to do your own elevator pitches. As he said, I will be distributing the slides to everyone in the next day or so, along with a copy of the recording, so you can watch this again and discuss it in some small groups and maybe work together to refine your elevator pitches a little bit as well.
One other thing I want to.
Sure.
Sorry, I was just going to add one other thought here. You just reminded me of it, Lindsay, that, because ILN is a network of many firms and many firms who probably do similar kinds of work, it's a really good idea not to just let the jurisdiction be the differentiator. So again, if there's something that your firm does where there's a way to brand it and set it apart from some of the other firms in the network, you can use some of these techniques to do that. And I would just really encourage it, because obviously ILN provides yet another opportunity to connect with firms who may have work to refer to you. But the easier you are to find, the more effective you'll find the network to be for you.
And I couldn't agree more. And we find that it's not just limited by jurisdiction. I mean, obviously, in many cases, that makes it fairly easy for lawyers to find each other when there's a matter that's jurisdictionally based. But there's a lot of opportunities for our lawyers to work together and put together teams that are based around particular matters, particular clients. We highly advise our lawyers to look and see who their top clients are and where there might be some overlap there as well. So there's a lot of opportunities to work together within the network outside of just the jurisdictional opportunities that exist. So that's definitely something we advocate very, very frequently. So with that, I will remind everyone that our next webinar with Dave will be on July 28th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on time management for busy lawyers, increasing efficiency in a demanding work environment. We look forward to seeing many of you there on July 28th. And if you have any questions for me or for David, please feel free to let us know. We will be available by email, and I'll circulate David's contact information with the email following this as well. So thanks again, David, and we look forward to speaking with you next month.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. Great to be on another ILN program.
Thanks so much, everyone.